بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. We begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the compassionate, the merciful. We ask that He send peace and blessings upon our noble and our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He purifies our hearts and our intentions, that He melds our intentions with the intentions of our pious predecessors, particularly the intentions of our noble and our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khairan for joining us for another session of prophetic guidance on the holy month of Ramadan. 40 hadith on the merits of Ramadan, its fast and voluntary fast throughout the year. This is the 5th class, and we will be covering the 4th hadith inshallah together today. Before we do that, we'd like to do just a quick recap of last session's hadith. The general and most significant points of the hadith is that the Prophet ﷺ said what was to the effect of, whoever fasts Ramadan with the condition of belief and expectation, they'll be forgiven of all their sins. Whoever stands, meaning in prayer, in the month of Ramadan with the condition of belief and expectation, all of their previous sins will be forgiven. And whoever stands, meaning in prayer, on the day of immense worth, Laylat al-Qadr, with the conditions of belief and expectation, they'll be forgiven of all their sins. So Ramadan is a great opportunity to be forgiven of one's sins, and we said that that's limited to minor sins. As for the major sins, one needs to take part in repentance. They need to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and make repentance. Today we're going to cover another hadith of Sayyidina Abu Hurairah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be well pleased with him. And the general translation of the hadith is as follows. Abu Hurairah, Allah be well pleased with him, said that the Messenger of Allah, Allah bless him and give him peace, said, every good deed of the children of Adam is multiplied by 10, up to 700 times. Allah Most High said, except for fasting, for truly it is for me, and I myself shall reward for it. The one who fasts abandons his pleasure and food for my sake. For the one fasting, there are two joys, the joy upon breaking the fast and the joy upon meeting their Lord. Truly, I swear that the odor of the mouth of the person fasting is sweeter in the divine presence than the scent of musk. Fasting is a shield. On the day which one of you fasts, let them not say lewd speech, nor speak ignorantly. And if someone insults them or fights them, let them say, I am a person that is fasting. The two sheikhs narrated it. So that's a longer hadith, and we'll speak about the length and some of the points related to it. But let's just kind of recap real quick in maybe simpler language the main points of the hadith. So the hadith, essentially, you can almost break it into a few different points. The first point is that a person's good deeds, when they do them, is actually rewarded by at least 10 times that amount, up to 700 times. So that's the first point. The second point is, but not fasting. Fasting is somehow unique, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the hadith, it is for me, meaning for Allah, and I myself shall reward for it. So generally, good deeds are rewarded by at least 10 up to 700. But fasting is somehow different. And then the third point is that the one who fasts, is abandoning his pleasure and his food for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sake. The fourth point, the one who fasts has two joys. The first joy is when they break their fast, when they eat, and the second joy is when they meet their Lord. That's number 4. Number 5 is that the Prophet ﷺ said that the bad breath of the person fasting is sweeter in the divine presence than the scent of musk. So, you know, that the bad breath that a person has, the odor that they have, especially after they've been fasting for most of the day, that actually is sweeter. It seems bad in this world, but actually, you know, maybe if we can use the word, you know, we use it loosely here, metaphysically, right? It's actually sweeter than musk itself. The next point is that fasting is some type of shield, which we'll talk about here. A shield from what? And then the last point is that when a person fasts, they shouldn't say lewd speech, you know, speech that has to do with, just lewd things that are about sexuality, or speaking about a person's like physical appearance in some type of lewd way, etc. And that a person should not get angry or loud, right? There's variations in the hadith, but that's the one that's in the collection that we've got. In fact, the compiler actually explains what that word means, and that's how he explains it. And if the person continues to try to push you, that you should say, I'm a person that is fasting, right? So those are the main points of the hadith. So let's do what we've been doing up to this point. The first step is, who narrates this hadith? Where is this hadith found? Beyond being found in this compilation, and beyond kind of the secondary works that the author said that he extracted these hadith from, in the central works, right? Where is this hadith found? So this hadith of Sayyidina Abu Hurairah primarily, and we'll see actually it's not just Sayyidina Abu Hurairah who narrated it, but this primary hadith narrated by Sayyidina Abu Hurairah is found in Bukhari in more than one place. For example, it's found in the chapter that has to do with the merits of fasting, or the virtues of fasting. The chapter that has to do what to say if you're cursed at, right? Because of that section on how to respond. A section has to do with musk, the scent of musk. It's also found in Muslim, in the virtues of fasting, right? Muslim, Sahih Muslim. It's found in the Muwatta of Imam Malik. It's found in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad. Yes, by Sayyidina Abu Hurairah, but also by Abdullah bin Mas'ud. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be well pleased with him. And by Abu Sa'id, right? There's one version that's narrated by Sayyidina Abu Hurairah and by Abu Sa'id. So now you've got at least 3 companions. And you got a 4th by Jabir, all in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad. Okay? So this is multiple companions narrating, not necessarily the same word for word hadith, but for lack of a better word, the same hadith, right, that we're studying. The Sunan of Darimi, we find the hadith. The Sunan of Ibn Majah, right? And one of the interesting things about the hadith found in the Sunan of Ibn Majah is, in one version, you're going to find that actually it has, like what we're seeing in front of us, the hadith that we're reading, about 3/4 of it is found as one hadith. And that's, maybe I should, before I go on, just pause to speak to that those things that I mentioned, those 7 or so things, actually, if you go back to the original hadith sources, often it's just 1 or 2, maybe 3 of them in one narration. And then you go to another narration and it's got the other ones. So it seems that, Allahu A'lam, as far as I can tell, that the compiler, the source that he's brought in front of us is a compilation of all of the different variations, right? But in Sunan of Ibn Majah, there is a narration that covers about 3/4 of the ones together, right? So there's only a few that would have been absent. In Tirmidhi, we find this hadith. And of course in the Sunan al-Kubra of al-Nasa'i, we find it, and the Sunan of al-Nasa'i. We also find it with different Sahaba in Nasa'i as well. And there's an additional one to the ones mentioned, which is by Sayyidina Ali, karamallahu wajha. And we find it in the Sahih of Ibn Khuzaymah. And then we find it in Tahawi's Mushkil al-Athar, which we'll come back to because it has an important point, and Ibn Hibban. Again, I'm doing this to show you that these hadiths that he's citing are very widespread among the core hadith compilers. All right, and it shows you kind of a certain level of its well-knownness and its authenticity, right? So the next thing that we want to do, inshallah, is we want to look at a little bit closer at some of the meanings. Some of the things that are mentioned in the hadith, the commentators spent more time kind of extrapolating on them, because we looked at kind of the general meanings, right? But let's kind of focus on some of the meanings found in the hadith. The first meaning we want to talk about is this Arabic word junnah, that fasting is a shield. That's how I translated it. That's what's often translated. It's a shield. What does this word junnah mean? What did the Prophet ﷺ mean when he said fasting is a shield, right? So some of the commentators, after getting the linguistic side out of the way, that it's a wiqaya, it's a protection, and it's a sitr, something that covers it, right? So that's what the word junnah means. It means that it's a protection and it covers. So then the ulama said, well, but what protection from what? Right? Covering of what? So some of the ulama took the position that it's from the fire. And there are versions of the narration of the hadith that basically speak to that. And that's one of the things hopefully you're going to take away from this, is that the variations in the hadith often will result in either a different meaning or at least supporting one meaning over another. Right? Another opinion is that it protects you from, as we said, yes, from the fire, but also it protects you from other things, like one other opinion says it protects you from desires, right? So it protects you from, kind of, as we said a few hadiths ago, it protects you from kind of engaging in one's lower desires, or from sins, right? That's another one. Some of them took a little bit of a different position, and they said, no, it protects you from fighting, essentially, because that's one of the variants of the hadith. One of the branches of the hadith, that one shouldn't engage in lewd speech, but one shouldn't also argue or get ignorant, as one version of the hadith says. And if somebody tries to fight them or tries to speak ill towards them, that one should say, "What? I'm fasting." Another variation or another opinion on this word junnah and how it ties into the greater hadith, is that no, it's a protective shield as long as one doesn't violate it. In other words, yes, it's a shield as long as you don't violate that shield. In other words, it's not that it's necessarily protecting you from doing those things. It's protecting you as long as you don't do those things. And there are versions of hadith that support that. For example, in one of the versions, it uses the word ghiba. The word ghiba is found in it, which is to backbite. So as long as a person doesn't engage in backbiting. Even the versions that mentioned not saying lewd speech, etc., the commentators mention that this kind of indicates that, yes, it's a shield as long as one doesn't engage in those types of things. So one of the things I want you to kind of take away from the multiple meanings around this word is to show you how the kind of the linguistic meaning, and then maybe we can say the meaning in its context, is so tied to what version and variant of the hadith one is looking at, right? Because depending on the variation, that word can indicate different things, right? So one sees that, and it's a possibility that in a lot of these cases, many meanings are could be the truth and not just one, right? All right, so we covered that. The next word that we want to focus on in the hadith is these kind of two commands that one shouldn't, لا يرفث ولا يجهل, in one version, right? In this version in front of us, it's not yajhal. It's a different word, but we want to focus on these two words. So the Prophet ﷺ says that a person during fasting should not yarfuth. They shouldn't engage in lewd speech. They shouldn't talk about things that are really, the commentators say, something almost like intimate or sexual in nature, or focusing, saying things about the person, the opposite gender that, again, is very lewd. And the commentators mentioned that this isn't that the Prophet ﷺ is saying that a person outside of it, it's okay to do that. It's that during it, it's even more established that one shouldn't. And some of the commentators actually said it's tying this high level status of fasting to the people who don't do that. In other words, yeah, inside and outside of fasting, a person is not supposed to speak lewdly, for example, right? But if you're going to see fasting as this high status thing that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows and rewards for, and it's for him, it's as long as you're not doing these other things, right? That kind of makes sense in that context. La yajhal, one of the versions says, that one does not do what the people of ignorance do, like what screaming, arguing, right? As we say in slang, not getting ignorant, right? So these are kind of some of the meanings that I think are important. Okay. The next thing that we want to cover is we want to talk a little bit about a couple kind of questions that come up in the hadith before we kind of re-summarize it. The first thing is this concept of the odor of a person's mouth being like musk, right? So the commentators here also found this. We have to kind of engage in this and understand it. What does it mean that God finds, or God, or one's odor of one's mouth while they're fasting is more beautiful to God than musk? How do we understand something like that, right? So one opinion is that this is a type of metaphor. It's a type of, actually what's called in Arabic technical term, isti'ara, which is that the fragrance of musk for the Arabs was something that was considered beautiful and smelled good, and they would bring things that smell good closer to them. That's just kind of the norm. People bring good smells closer towards them. So therefore, the person who engages in fasting, their breath is more beautiful than musk, meaning they are more close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than not, right? Than those who are not fasting, for example, or than not being in the state of fasting, right? That's one way. Another way that they dealt with it is they said, no, that's the angels. The angels find it more beautiful. A third way is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you in the next life with a reward that smells better than musk, right? This is some of the ways that they deal with it. The conclusion is that the ulama agree that it indicates acceptance from Allah, meaning the fast, you being accepted, and Allah being pleased with you, right? So his saying that your breath, despite its odor, is more beautiful than musk is that it's been accepted, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what? He's pleased with it. All right. The final thing we want to cover, inshallah, before we kind of re-summarize the main meanings of the hadith, is this portion of the hadith where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in one version, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who's saying it. He's saying that the one who's fasting, the fasting is for me and I will reward for it. And before we kind of talk about the differences of opinion about how to understand that, this is what's called a hadith qudsi. This section of the hadith, the whole hadith isn't, but this section of the hadith where in some versions it's Allah talking, right? It's Allah speaking. It's Allah's words, right? That's called the hadith qudsi, a divine hadith. That means that the wording and the meaning are from Allah. Whereas regular prophetic hadiths, the meaning is generally from Allah, unless we've been told otherwise. But the wording is from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Okay? And that's one way of understanding hadith qudsi, and one that I'll stick to, inshallah, during my classes. So, what is it? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say that? That's what the main thing that we want to focus on. Why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what's so unique about fasting that makes it different from other acts of worship? Aren't all acts of worship for Allah? So what makes it different? This was actually a huge conversation amongst the commentators of this hadith. And there are many, many, many opinions. But I just want to give you a few to give you an idea. One of the first positions about this is that fasting it's very difficult to have riyā in. It's very difficult for a person to be ostentatious with fasting. Ostentatious, where like you're doing it for someone else, you're showing it off to someone else. Because fasting is not something that you do in front of people, it's something that you don't do. The earliest person that I was able to find who said something like this is Imam al-Tahawi, who died in the early 4th century. And he actually says that fasting is something that you don't do, and the unique thing about fasting is that people can't see you do it. So this position becomes very popular, for example, with Imam al-Ghazali and on, but I found it as early as one of the great Salaf of the Ummah, Imam al-Tahawi, mentioning it in Mushkil al-Athar when he was engaging the different meanings of the hadith. And Imam Ibn Hajar actually says that there's a weak, but there is a narration that seems to indicate this meaning, in which the hadith says, "Laysa fi as-sawmi riya." There is no ostentation in fasting. It says the hadith is weak. If the hadith had been strong, it had been authentic, it would end the conversation for us. We would know what is unique about it, right? But he says this, a person can turn to this to kind of, for example, take one position over another. So that's one way of understanding this. So what's unique about it is that it's something that you're not doing as opposed to something you are doing. And two, that it's difficult to be ostentatious in it because of the fact that it's something that you don't do, right? People can't see you do it. Another position is that what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala meant in this hadith is, I only know its reward. Meaning that, okay, the regular good deeds are anywhere from 10 to 700, but for fasting, I'm the only one that knows how much I'm going to reward for it. They'll often dovetail it with this verse of Quran, إِنَّمَا يُوَفَّى الصَّابِرُونَ أَجْرًا بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ, the rough translation of the meaning of which is that those who are patient will be kind of recompensed with their reward without any calculation. They won't be recompensed with their reward except without calculation, meaning that's how high it is, right? So, in other words, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows how much they're going to be rewarded. And many, many, many commentators on this verse of Quran say that as-sabirun here is those who are fasting. I mean, there's other positions, but Ibn Hajar mentions that, I think he actually says most, right? Say that this verse refers to those who are those who are fasting. So that's one position. Another position is that it's just ennoblement. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by saying it's mine and I will reward for it, it's for me and I will reward for it, it's like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying the house of Allah, right? It's giving it a high status. And another position is that He loves it. He loves it. So these are kind of some of the meanings around the hadith. Again, what does the hadith kind of center on? If we gather all of the different variants on it, good deeds in general, 10 to 700 times their worth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the hadith Qudsi, the portion of it, that fasting is truly for me and I myself will reward for it. And we talked about all those unique things, why that could be. 3, the one who fasts abandons his pleasure in food for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That again talks to some of kind of the secret behind fasting, that one is working on themselves. And we've mentioned this already in the classes and it'll come up again. But this is one of the understandings of the ulama based upon this version, that it has to do with one giving up kind of these core attributes of themselves for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The next one is that there are 2 joys when one breaks their fast, but also when they meet their Lord. Again, this path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and being close to Him. And then that truly, I swear that the bad breath or the odor of a person fasting is sweeter in the divine presence than the scent of musk itself. And that fasting is a shield, and we talked about that. And then on the day one of you fast, let them not say any loud speech, let them not be angry and loud, and if someone insults them or fights them, let them say, I'm a person who is fasting. So that, I think, gives us a good summary of the hadith. Lastly, but not least, as we always talk about, what are some of the things that we can take away from this in terms of understanding hadith? Hopefully up to this point, it's become, very, very clear how intricate of a process it is to try to understand what a hadith means. And there are multiple levels to understanding, right? But one of the key things is that the hadiths themselves and the versions of it intertwine. That intertwining leads to variations in how you understand it. Sometimes, yes, it's because it's adding extra words or it's missing certain words. But sometimes those additions have you look at the other words that are found in all of them in a different light, right? That's number one. Number two, I hope it's become clear that not everything in Revelation is absolutely spelled out for us, right? And that is a very important lesson to take away when one reads the Quran, when one reads hadith. Not everything is totally spelled out for us. It's not intended to be, right? Certain things are clear. The main portions of the religion are absolutely clear. But there are things that that are not 100% clear, purposefully, intentionally, right? And there's room for ulama to kind of engage and try to extract, and that's part of the process. That's part of the intent of the lawgiver, right? The intent of the creator that we do that, right? And so the ulama will engage in understanding, but there are keys to how we understand it. Again, as we talked about last time, through knowing the rules of the language, through knowing these different tools and disciplines to engage in these texts. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He makes us of the people who really give this month its due. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we be of the people who are patient, as the verse indicates, the ones who are fasting. And that this fasting be for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And whatever, He wants to reward for it, we accept. And what we want is to be with Him. And we want to be able to gaze upon His noble countenance. That we be of the people who have joy, yes, when we break our fast, but also in the next life when we meet our Lord. That we be people whose odor during this month, due to the fast, is more beautiful than musk, and it was the beautiful of smells. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He beautify us with this shield of fasting, and He protect us, and have us protect us from arguing or saying anything lewd or listening to anything like that. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that and much, much more. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum.